I get tips from people as to where there might be something hiding, and then sometimes I'll just take a day and just go searching.
Danny Koker clawed his way out of a grease-stained garage and into America's living room on Pawn Stars. His eye for classic cars was so sharp that the History Channel handed him his own franchise, Counting Cars. Then, in 2021, the show vanished without a word, leaving fans to ask, what really happened behind the scenes? And will the Count ever drive his way back to the top? Join us as we tell the untold story of Danny Koker. The Sudden Silence. The last episode of Counting Cars didn't feel like it's ending. It aired on a Tuesday night in the spring of 2021, and if memory serves right, it was just another restoration. A 1969 Chevy Nova that ended with a handshake and a revving engine. When the screen went black, America changed the channel, assuming the show would be back next week. But it never came back. For the first few months, fans assumed it was just a break. COVID had wreaked havoc on production schedules everywhere. But as weeks turned into months, and months turned into a full year, the silence became deafening. The History Channel stopped mentioning Counting Cars in its promos. Danny Koker's social media went dark. There was no explanation. And as always, the internet began to dig. First came the rumors. They spread like wildfire across tabloids. Some said the FBI raided his bar. Others said Danny had been arrested for fraud. All this while, Danny said nothing. When the official truth came out, it said it was because the History Channel had changed. Automotive programming was becoming expensive to produce and cheaper to cancel. Each episode of Counting Cars costs tens of thousands of dollars in restoration parts alone, not counting the salaries of Danny's 11-man crew. Meanwhile, ratings had slipped from a peak of over 3 million viewers per episode to barely half of that. The pandemic made everything even worse. With lockdowns, car hunts became impossible. But before the History Channel pulled the plug, something was already happening inside Count's Customs. Something that had nothing to do with ratings. Something that made Danny stop trusting his team and nearly give up the show. But what kind of man walks away from everything he built without a single word? The boy who built himself twice. Before the bar and the billion-dollar franchise, Danny Koker was a 6'4" piano prodigy from Cleveland, Ohio. Born September 23, 1964, Danny grew up surrounded by two very different kinds of horsepower: the roaring engines of American muscle cars and the soaring chords of rock and gospel music. His father and uncle were Ford Motors engineers who could tear down an engine blindfolded. His family also ran a Christian singing group, and young Danny traveled with them, fingers dancing across piano keys in churches and revival tents across the Midwest. By age 12, he could play anything from Bach to boogie woogie. By 16, he could rebuild a carburetor. Now, most people would pick one lane: musician or mechanic, performer or tradesman. But Danny looked at that choice and laughed. He would do everything. After moving to Las Vegas as a young man, he landed a gig hosting a B-grade horror movie show called Saturday Frights at the Movies on a local TV station his family owned. Danny Koker created a character called Count Cool Rider, who wore a cape, cracked jokes between B-movie reels, and became a cult hero to every weird kid in the Vegas Valley. That was his first taste of television fame, and he loved it. But the cars never left him. In the late 1990s, he opened Count's Customs, a small auto shop specializing in restorations and custom builds. At the same time, he formed a 1970s-style rock band called Count 77 and opened a bar called Count's Vamped Rock Bar and Grill, a vampire-themed venue with moody lighting, leather booths, and live music that became a sanctuary for bikers, rockers, and anyone who wanted to hear Deep Purple played loud. He ran the shop during the day, played piano at night, and hosted the occasional horror marathon on weekends. By 2008, Danny Koker was a Vegas legend, but only in Vegas. Outside the city limits, almost no one knew his name. He was a jack of all trades and master of all of them, yet still trapped in the desert. Then the phone rang, or rather, Rick Harrison's pawn shop called. The producers of Pawn Stars needed a classic car expert who could speak on camera without sounding like a textbook. Someone sent them to Count's Customs. Danny walked onto the set, looked at a rusted 1970 Challenger, and told the owner its exact value down to the last dollar, including the cost of every missing part. The producers were stunned. The audience loved him. He became a recurring guest, then a fan favorite. Every time Danny appeared, ratings spiked. The History Channel noticed. And in that moment, Danny Koker realized something terrifying and exhilarating. He was no longer just a pianist, a host, a mechanic, or a bar owner. He was about to become a television star. But stardom comes with a price. And for Danny, that price would eventually include betrayal, deepfakes, and the quiet end of the show that made him famous. So when the History Channel handed him his own franchise, did Danny Koker finally get everything he wanted? Or did he just trade one kind of pressure for another? Pawn Stars to primetime. When the History Channel executives flew to Las Vegas to meet Danny at Count's Customs, they expected a garage. They found a kingdom, rows of restored classics gleaming under fluorescent lights, a crew of tattooed, loud-mouthed artists who treated every project like a holy mission, a bar next door where Danny played piano until 2 in the morning. It dawned on them that they were meeting a man who had built a brand for himself. The pitch meeting was short. "Give us 6 episodes," the exec said. "We'll call it Counting Cars. You be you. We'll point cameras." Danny agreed on one condition: no scripts, no fake drama. What you see is what you get. Counting Cars premiered in August 2012. The first episode featured a 1970 Plymouth Superbird, a winged NASCAR homologation beast so rare that Danny flew to Nebraska to haggle with a farmer who didn't want to sell. The negotiation took 3 hours. Danny walked away with the car and a handshake. The episode ended with the Superbird's first start in 20 years, smoke pouring from the exhaust, and Danny's grin wide enough to crack his face. America was hooked, and 6 episodes became 9 seasons. Over the next 9 seasons, the show delivered moment after moment that fans still quote. Season 2 brought the Copper Cobra, a 1965 AC Cobra replica that Danny bought from a widow who didn't know its worth. He paid her double the asking price on camera, and the internet called him a saint. Season 3 introduced the Vegas Rat Rod, a Frankenstein of rusted parts that Horny Mike airbrushed with skulls and flames. Danny hated it. The fans loved it. The argument became the episode's best scene. But the show wasn't just about the cars. It was about the chaos of Count's Customs. Ryan Evans, the lead painter, who could lay down a candy apple finish so deep you could fall into it, but who also once threw a wrench at Horny Mike for touching a wet door panel. Kevin Mack, Danny's right hand, who never smiled on camera but could fabricate a bracket out of scrap metal in 10 minutes, and who once stormed off set for an entire day after Danny questioned his welding. Roli Sabo, the Hungarian-born fabricator who threatened to quit twice during the first season, both times over the placement of a gas cap. And Shannon Aikau, the gentle giant who broke up every fight with a quiet, "Come on, you guys." Viewers tuned in for the cars, but stayed for the dysfunction. It was the real world with grease under its fingernails, and at the center of it all was Danny, the ringmaster, the referee, the guy who had to keep 11 egos from imploding, while also hunting down a 1971 Hemi Cuda in a barn outside Tulsa. The show's peak came in Season 6, when Danny attempted his most ambitious project ever: a complete restoration of a 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429, one of only 859 ever built. The engine alone cost $40,000. The paint took 3 tries. Ryan Evans nearly walked out. The episode aired in March 2017 and drew 2.8 million viewers, the show's highest rating ever. Danny celebrated by playing a 3-hour set at Vamped, then went back to the shop the next morning and started all over again. But behind the glory, the engine was starting to knock. By Season 8, the cracks were visible to anyone paying attention. Episodes felt shorter, and the crew's arguments, once raw and spontaneous, now had the rhythm of a script. Worse still, something terrible was happening under Danny's nose. What was the betrayal hiding inside his own garage? The one that would make the cancellation feel like a relief. The man in the books. While millions of viewers watched Danny Koker haggle over rusted fenders and argue with horny Mike about skull paint, a much quieter crime was happening inside Count's Customs. Danny didn't notice at first. Why would he? The shop was busy. The show was successful. But it wasn't until an outside accountant reviewed the books in late 2018 that the first red flag appeared. The Count, who had stared down stubborn farmers and lied to widows and screaming mechanics, sat in silence as the numbers were laid out in front of him. He didn't yell. He didn't smash anything. He just listened. Then he asked one question. Who? It was Joseph Frontiera. Joseph never appeared on an episode of Counting Cars. He was the bookkeeper, the man Danny trusted to pay the bills, track the expenses, and keep the financial engine running while the Count played rock star on screen. He was, by all appearances, boring. And that was exactly what made him dangerous. For years, Joseph handled the money with no oversight. He trusted his bookkeeper the way he trusted his mechanics, completely. That trust cost him. Joseph began small. A few $1,000s here, a false invoice there. He created fake vendors, paid them from Count's Customs accounts, then funneled the money back to himself. When no one noticed, he got bolder. 5,000 became 10. 10 became 20. Over time, he siphoned more than $75,000 from the business. The money was supposed to buy parts, pay painters, and keep the lights on. Instead, it bought Frontiera, a quiet life he hadn't earned. Danny felt something he had never felt in 40 years of turning wrenches and making deals. He felt stupid. He had let a man in a collared shirt steal from the family he had built. Danny didn't go to the tabloids. Instead, he did what he always did when something needed fixing. He went to work. He hired a private investigator who tracked every fake transaction and every stolen dollar. It took months, but by the end, he built an ironclad enough to sink a battleship. In 2020, just as Counting Cars was airing its final season, Danny took Joseph Frontiera to court. The evidence was overwhelming. Frontiera had no defense. He was found liable for fraud and embezzlement. The judge ordered him to pay $41,000 in damages, only part of what he stole, but enough to put his name in a public record that will follow him forever. But the damage was already done. The betrayal had cracked something inside Count's Customs. Danny looked at his crew differently now. He wondered who else might be hiding something. He stopped trusting the way he used to. And when the History Channel quietly declined to renew Counting Cars in 2021, Danny didn't fight for it. He just let it go. But the tabloids weren't done with him. They had the wrong name, and they were about to turn a lie into a wildfire. How would Danny survive when the lies turned his closest friend into a villain, and the whole world believed it? The deepfake. The deepfake appeared on a sleepy Facebook group dedicated to reality TV gossip. At first, only a few people liked and shared it, and nothing about that first hour suggested a wildfire. But in just a matter of days, the image of Ryan Evans in an orange jumpsuit had jumped to YouTube, Reddit, and a dozen other tabloid websites that recycled each other's lies. That image was accompanied by a brutal caption that said, "Counting Cars painter embezzled $70,000. Danny Koker covered it up." Ryan Evans had spent over 20 years at Counts Customs. He was the kind of man who never raised his voice or sought the spotlight. All he enjoyed doing was laying down paint jobs that made grown men cry. He believed in Danny and the crew so much that even when better offers came, he turned them down. And now, his reputation was being shredded by people who knew nothing about him. Danny saw all of this from his garage, but his lawyers gave him the same advice they had given him for every rumor since the show started. Do not engage. But it was tough for Danny. He wanted to scream and tell the world that the real thief was Joseph Frontera, who keepers had already been taking to court and who had already been ordered to pay damages. Still, he knew that just one public statement could make everything worse, so he chose silence. But silence only made things worse. Another YouTuber with 1 million subscribers made a video titled "The Rot Inside Counts Customs," and the thumbnail showed Ryan's fake mugshot next to Danny's face with a red X over it. That video got millions of views, and even after Danny's lawyer sent a takedown notice, it remained up. More lies started to pile up. One website claimed Danny had been arrested for fraud. Another said he was shilling unlicensed CBD products on Fox News. Each one more absurd than the last. Of course, we know that the internet's memory is short, but its appetite for outrage is endless. Soon enough, Danny's bar, which had been his sanctuary for 16 years, began to be affected. The rumors started scaring off sponsors, bands began to cancel, the crowd thinned, and then he had to pour his own money into keeping the lights on. But in June 2025, Danny was done. So within 1 week, he closed down the bar. That decision fueled the tabloids even more. They called him a finished, broken man. But what they didn't know was that even though the Count had been silent for years, it was all a strategy. What was the Count planning while the world thought he was finished? And would he ever find his way back to the spotlight? New gears, same Count. If one only read the tabloids, one would have thought Danny Koker was finished by the summer of 2025. The headlines wrote him off as another Vegas Icarus, a guy who flew too close to the sun and melted his wings somewhere over the Strip. But the headlines never bothered to drive down to Counts Customs and look through the garage doors. Because behind those doors, the same lifts were still creaking under the weight of classic Mustangs and vintage Harleys. And though the cameras were gone, Danny Koker was still there every morning before the sun came up, turning wrenches with the same grease-stained hands that had been doing it since the late 90s. While the internet was busy burying him, Danny was quietly having conversations that would have made the tabloids choke on their own headlines. He had been talking to 2 different networks about 3 separate television concepts. He was pitching something that felt more like the real Danny Koker, a show that blended his love for cars, music, and his genuine, unfiltered personality. For now, the details are under wraps. But at the same time, he launched a podcast called Counts Culture, where Danny sits down with someone interesting. Could be a fellow car builder, a rock musician, or an old friend from the Vegas days, and they just talk. It's the closest thing to sitting in his garage and listening to him shoot the breeze while a 1970 Challenger idles in the background. The podcast doesn't have millions of listeners, but it has the right listeners, the kind who stuck with him through the silence and never believed the lies. And then there is the money. Everyone loves to speculate about a celebrity's finances when they fall from grace, but Danny Koker never fell as far as the headlines suggested. His net worth sits at an estimated $15 million. Not Hollywood rich, but hardly broke. He owns the land under what used to be Counts Vamped, a purchase he made for over $2 million back when the show was at its peak. That is the kind of move a guy makes when he is thinking about the long game. So, where does that leave Danny Koker today? He is still in Las Vegas, still running Counts Customs, still playing piano when the mood strikes him, still wearing the bandana and the leather vest, because that is who he is, not a costume he puts on for cameras. The only difference is that he is doing it on his own terms now, and no one can ever count out the count. So, what do you think? Was Danny Koker's silence a costly mistake, or the smartest move he ever made? And will we see him back on television before the year is over? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.